And the other comment that it is a stealth tax. One thing I will certainly say about it is there's nothing stealthy about it whatsoever. I mean, whatsoever. I believe that there is nothing intrinsically unreasonable about expecting motorcyclists to make a charge, but I think it is quite clear. I mean that from the pilot that we've got the charge higher, too high. What has happened is that the take-up rate has been far higher than we were expecting. I mean, that's incidentally giving the lie to those who said that there would be a boycott of coming into Westminster. The fact is that the income has been far greater than we expected, and therefore it is perfectly reasonable to reduce the charge. And in particular, I was very much taken with a constituent who came to see me, who was a motorcyclist, who explained very carefully, and he was absolutely right, that there's a complete anomaly for residents, whereby it would be cheaper for them to pay the £85 for a resident parking permit than the charge it should. And therefore I believe that should certainly be addressed, and that if we continue this scheme, that the resident charge will be reduced. I understand my colleague Councillor Hooper is going to make a proposal for what the resident charge might be. But certainly, rather than the scheme that is suggested by the officers for residents would be quite inappropriate, because it would require them to get a free permit provided they purchase a resident permit for a car, or for the rate applicable to a car. There's nothing free about that. I think that we should be introducing a reduced figure for residents below the level that is currently charged for a car.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
Are made elsewhere, because it says clearly in this paper you need to pay. What I would like to know is what you need to pay. Now, I would like to say, Chairman, that I think this committee should recommend to the Cabinet member concerned that the following charges are applicable. And if we could agree that residents would pay £50 a year, non-residents would pay £100 a year, but there would also be a daily charge if you wanted a day's permit for £1 a day. And that is the recommendation that I would hope this committee could agree, and it could be forwarded to the Cabinet member, because we are anxious to reach a solution to this, and only by negotiating can we do so. And this has been a negotiating meeting, and I hope it's been appreciated as that on all sides. Thank you.
I think that's mostly gentlemen in the gallery that are calling out. We really would be very grateful if you could keep the peace. Thank you. Councillor Smith. Excuse me, Councillor Smith. Because if there are also ladies calling out, then ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you to keep the peace.
First of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming to speak to us. I think, thank you for raising your points in actually quite an eloquent way. I agree with quite a lot of what you said, and I certainly agree that using motorcycles is preferable to using cars. But then again, demand has been increasing, and we've, as we see in the report, there is a problem of demand for curbside space. There's a cost to increase that, and there's a cost to add the security devices which many motorcyclists said they wanted. And I think it's reasonable for a moderate costs to be imposed on that. Just going back to Councillor De Cruz's point about income, I just want to know what expectation has there been about PCN income falling. I note it's fallen considerably since the start of the scheme, and I just want to know whether that's expected to fall further as people get used to the scheme, which will therefore reduce the income from the charge. And what calculations, as Councillor De Cruz asked, has there been about costs if the charge is reduced to £1? And I would also like to say I agree with Councillor Hooper's suggestion that the cost should be reduced to £50, and residents should be allowed to pay £50, which will allow them to park in solar motorcycle bays around the city, rather than paying £85, which would allow them to park in residence bays.
Kevin, would you like to answer those questions, please?
Chairman, I will do my best. I may defer to some of my colleagues on the greener issues who are far more experienced than I am. I'm just dealing with the income and cost issues first. And I think it's important that we clarify this, and I will make a commitment to this committee to publish the full accounts for motorcycle parking from its conception. The figures for motorcycle charging on the PCN side are a gross figure of PCNs issued to motorcycles in the bays. It's a gross figure. The current level of PCNs issued to motorcycles is consistent with the level of PCNs issued circa 2,500 a month pre the scheme. So on that basis there is no now net additional gross income on PCNs for charges for motorcyclists. The cost of... Okay. Prior to the scheme being introduced, motorcyclists were subject of penalty charge notices being issued for illegal parking. The level of charge was 2,500 tickets a month on average, and the graph shows that in the report. Therefore, 25,000 tickets, 25,000 a year is around about 1.4 million. That's gross. The cost of enforcing parking in Westminster is 75% of PCN by value. So the net figure on the current charge of PCNs is about £350,000 a year surplus on PCN issue.
I think it would have been helpful to have
Appreciate that, Chairman, which is why I've made a commitment to actually clarify and qualify some of those comments. In terms of the expectations around the scheme, the business case of the scheme was generated in 2006-2007 at its early inception, and the presumption at that time was based on the level of take-up and transactions, which equated, assuming a certain profile of permit purchase, to £675,000 per year. That has clearly been exceeded, largely because, and I accept the point, the volume of transactions for permit purchase, not motorcyclists, has far exceeded our expectations. In terms of modelling the impact on a reduction in charge, whatever that might be, we've also tried to assume what the shift would look like. And subject to the committee's recommendation to Cabinet member, we will produce a full profile of the likely surpluses associated with the scheme. What I must also qualify is the full costs have not been included in terms of enforcing of this scheme, largely because the vast majority of our enforcement costs are associated with the other 80 or 90% of penalty charge notices we issue in the city. If you take the proportion of penalty charges issued to motorcyclists as a proportion of the total PCNs issued in Westminster, the net cost of enforcement for those bays is £500,000 a year. That, again, is an error on our part for not properly informing the committee of those numbers. And I apologise to everybody in the audience for the mistake on the addition. Moving forward to the green issues, I'll come back to the residence issue that Councillor de Cruz raised. All the objections from residents, which accounted for 5.8% of total objections, were against the scheme. I can't profile that for you in terms of location or ward. One of the key areas that I think has been highlighted by the members of the committee is the fact that we are seeing a much bigger surge in the purchase of the daily tickets than we are in any other form of permit. And I think one thing we have to do as a council is to better promote the scheme and the relative benefits of purchasing permits of a longer duration than daily and weekly. I think it was Councillor Bush who raised the issue around, or another member, around the issues about the method of payment. The scheme is designed to be as flexible as possible. Credit cards, pre-booking, online booking, and as the committee recognised, you can park in any bay as many times as you wish during the course of the day. We have had some concerns raised about motorcyclists who do not benefit from a credit card, or perhaps are unable to do not have a mobile phone, or access to the internet. And one of the recommendations in this report is we recognise that, and we would seek to provide greater accessibility to the scheme for those that are not as advantaged in terms of having alternative forms of payment. Councillor Bradley's comments around the tone of the report, I take the points. It was not the officer's intention to infer or imply or to suggest a way forward. We were trying to be objective as we possibly could, and I'm sure that doesn't happen again in a presentation of a report.